When we think about God's timing, we often associate it with a sense of control, of knowing that everything is going to work out for our good. But what happens when life doesn't feel like that? When things are uncertain, and our plans seem to be crumbling all around us? That's when trusting God's timing becomes the ultimate test of faith. In those moments, it's easy to feel like we're losing control, like the rug has been pulled out from under our feet, and we're left struggling to make sense of it all. We start to wonder if there really is a divine plan, or if we're just winging it, trying to make the best of a bad situation. As we navigate the ups and downs of life, we're constantly reminded that God's timing is not our timing. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially when we're faced with uncertainty and unpredictability. But it's in those moments that we're forced to confront our own fears, our own doubts, and our own limitations. So, what does it look like to trust God's timing when life feels like it's spinning out of control? Is it even possible to have faith when everything around us seems to be falling apart? We've all been there at some point or another, feeling frustrated, feeling confused, feeling helpless. It's like we're stuck in a never-ending cycle of uncertainty, and we can't seem to find our way out. We start to question God's plan, wondering if He's even listening, if He even cares. We feel like we're walking through a dark forest, with no clear path in sight. We're trying to make sense of it all, but everything seems to be shrouded in mystery. And in those moments, it's easy to lose faith, to doubt that God really is in control. But what if we could learn to trust God's timing, even when life feels like it's out of control? What if we could find a way to surrender our fears, our doubts, and our anxieties, and simply trust that God has a plan? We've heard the stories of people who've navigated their struggles by leaning into faith. We've seen how their trust in God's timing has transformed their lives, bringing them peace, comfort, and hope in the darkest of times. Let's take a look at a few biblical examples that illustrate this beautifully. Take Joseph, for instance, who went from being a favored son to a slave in Egypt. Or David, who was anointed king, only to be pursued by King Saul and forced to flee for his life. In both cases, God's timing seemed slow, even absent. But what we see in hindsight is that God was working behind the scenes, orchestrating a plan that would ultimately bring glory to Himself and blessing to His people. Similarly, in our own lives, when we feel like God's timing is slow or non-existent, we need to remind ourselves that He's always working, always moving, always guiding us towards His ultimate purpose. I want to share a personal anecdote that illustrates this perfectly. A few years ago, I was going through a tough season, feeling lost and uncertain about my future. I was praying for direction, for clarity, for a sense of purpose. But instead of getting answers, I got silence. It felt like God was nowhere to be found, like I was walking through that dark forest all alone. But in that silence, I learned to lean into faith. I learned to trust that God's timing was perfect, even when I couldn't see it. Looking back, I realized that those moments of uncertainty were actually moments of growth, moments when God was shaping me, molding me, and preparing me for the road ahead. This reminds me of the story of Lazarus, who was raised from the dead by Jesus. When Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, were grieving his loss, Jesus was delayed in coming to their aid. He didn't rush to their side, instead, He waited, allowing their grief to deepen. But in that delay, something miraculous happened. Lazarus was raised from the dead, and Jesus was glorified. It was a pivotal moment in the story of salvation, a moment that would change the course of history. In the same way, when we feel like God's timing is slow, we need to remember that He's always working towards a greater purpose. He's always orchestrating a plan that will ultimately bring glory to Himself and blessing to us. One of the most powerful stories that demonstrates the transformative power of trusting God's timing is that of Corrie ten Boom. During World War II, Corrie and her family risked their lives to hide Jews from the Nazi occupation. Corrie's faith was tested in ways she never thought possible, and yet she continued to trust God's timing, even when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. And in the end, her trust was rewarded, as she saw God work miracles, bringing hope and redemption to the darkest of situations. What if we could have that same kind of faith? What if we could trust God's timing, even when life feels like it's spinning out of control? I believe that's exactly what God is calling us to do. As we reflect on the insights shared today, I want to leave you with a sense of hope and faith amidst chaos. Trusting God's timing is not about understanding everything, it's about surrendering our need for control and embracing His sovereign plan. In the midst of uncertainty, let's choose to trust that God is working, that He's always guiding us towards His ultimate purpose. Before I go, I want to invite you to share your own experiences in the comments below. How have you trusted God's timing in the midst of uncertainty? What stories of faith and resilience can you share with the community? And if you're interested in exploring more on faith and resilience, be sure to check out our video on the power of perseverance. Thanks for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next video.